Hello friends, and thank you so much for stopping by again. Today I have something really special planned. I got all this wood here and I will make 3 different cutting boards with inlays. Each board will be done a little bit different. And remember this cutting board from a previous video? Well, I'm going to upgrade this as well. So, lass uns anfangen.
Let's start by moving all the wood pieces over to the table saw to rip the lumber into smaller pieces. I cut the pieces to a thickness of 3.5 centimeters. I cut enough pieces for 2 different cutting boards. Use your miter saw to cut the pieces to size. This is going to be the last piece. All done with the pieces I will need. I will build 2 different cutting boards. Both will be end grain. To do this, the first glue up will resemble a side grain cutting board. Now I need a lot of glue and all of my clamps. Don't be shy with the glue. There is nothing worse than to notice after the glue has dried that you did not use enough. When I glue up larger cutting boards, sometimes it's hard to line up the boards right because the glue makes the pieces slide around once you apply pressure from the clamps. To make it a little bit easier, I like to pre-clamp every few boards before I add more. Add the rest of the pieces. This cutting board will resemble the American flag. Let the board sit to dry overnight. Now it's time to tackle the second board. First step, apply the glue. Have some fun with it. Next step, let's spread the glue. Last step is to stick those boards together and to tighten the clamps. Let it sit to dry overnight. Those little pieces are for the American flag. I will engrave the stars on it. However, in hindsight, it would have been much easier to leave the pieces as a whole before cutting them. It was difficult to get clamps on without the pieces sliding in all kinds of directions. You might remember this cutting board from a previous video. I started by sanding the surface slightly to get the board ready for the CNC machine. This should be enough for now. There will be lots of sanding later. Secure the board onto the CNC machine, and then it's off to my office to work on the designs. I worked on 3 different designs. Each design will have a male and a female part, so I have 6 files. The first one is a honeycomb. This will be the female part. The second design is a turtle. And this will be the male part of the turtle. As a last design, I did the stars of the American flag. I loaded the files into Carbide Motion, and I will start with the female part of the turtle. As you can tell, it came out beautifully. Up next is the male part. And this will be for the female part of the honeycomb. I used Purple Heart for the honeycomb pattern and it's really expensive. So to have less waste, instead of just flipping the pattern onto the male side, I moved the honeycombs close together. This means I have to cut the pieces individually and glue them up. It's the next day now and the glue has fully dried. It's time to run the wood pieces through the planer. This machine has become one of my favorites, even though I still cannot pronounce it. You insert a rough piece on one side and it comes out perfectly smooth on the other side. Once the piece is nice and clean, take it over to the table saw to cut it into strips to make an end grain cutting board out of it. The easiest way to cut those strips is to use a table saw sled. To get a preview of how the cutting board will look like, you can flip the pieces over a quarter turn. And now it's time for the glue up. Apply the glue, spread the glue, flip the pieces over, and tighten the clamps. Let the glue dry for about an hour or so you can glue on the missing two pieces without it falling apart. It's about an hour later now, and it's time to assemble the rest of the flag. And it's like always, apply the glue, spread the glue, assemble the pieces, and then tighten the clamps. Let the glue dry overnight. Next up is the turtle pattern board. I will insert the male part of the inlay into the female part. Therefore, you will need a lot of glue. Fits like a glove. Use clamps to hold the pieces together while it dries. While this one dries, let's flatten the surface of the honeycomb board. The board is too wide for the planer, either way. So I used a flattening bit. After, use your table saw and your sled to cut the wood into strips, just like with the other board. This is a preview of how the board will look like, and as you can tell, it's going to be way too long, so I took a few pieces out. And apply the glue, spread the glue, assemble the pieces, and tighten the clamps. Let the piece dry overnight. Here I'm flattening the American flag endgrain cutting board by using my router. Briefly sand it to get it ready to cut the stars. Those are the female stars, and these are the male stars. This is just the same step as previous. Spread the glue and insert the stars. In case you were wondering how come I glued them on individually instead of the whole piece, I had some issues with the clamps and having an even pressure. So some of the middle stars would have not been glued in tight enough, so I cut them in pieces and glued them on separately. And now it's back to the turtle pattern board and the most painful part. Take a Japanese pull saw and cut off the top side of the male part. This is going to be a workout. The piece won't fit in my bandsaw, and I don't want to run my CNC machine over it, since I do want to save the wood. So, the pull saw it is. And I made it. It's off finally. And now it's time for sanding dance. Take your sander and smoothen the surface. I started with 100 grit and worked my way up to 320. Let's call it a day. There will be much more sanding tomorrow. To get some fancy and professional looking edges, I used my Makita hand router. Glide the router along the edges. Repeat this step with every single board you have. After this, it's off to more sanding. Again, start with 100 and work your way up to 320. To not get an awfully rough cutting board after the first time you wash it, raise the grain by using water and letting it dry. After, come back and use 320 grit sanding paper to sand off the little grains. I attached legs to all 3 cutting boards. Make sure you pre-drill the holes. And drum roll! It's time for the finish. I'm using my own mica-made liquid hydration wood oil. Apply a generous amount and spread it all over the board. Let it dry overnight. The next day, wipe off any excess. After, apply mica-made Mousse Magousse wood butter. Let it dry for a few hours, then buff it. And we are fertig! And here's a close-up of the 3 different cutting boards. The end grain honeycomb, the side grain turtle pattern, and the end grain American flag. Please check my website for mica-made products. Thank you so much for watching. Tschüss!